The champagne flute slipped from my fingers, shattering against the marble floor of the Portland Convention Center ballroom as Stephen Brooks, my father's former operations manager, approached me with a puzzled expression. The sound cut through the ambient chatter of Morgan Industries' annual company celebration like a knife through silk. 300 employees, executives, and their families turned momentarily toward the commotion before returning to their conversations, dismissing me as just another clumsy guest at what was supposed to be a routine corporate event. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Alex Morgan? Stephen's voice carried a note of confusion as he stepped carefully around the broken glass. I hate to bother you, but we're about to begin the memorial presentation for your father, and I need to know where the board chairman is seated. The program specifically lists you as delivering the opening remarks. The words hung in the air between us like a physical presence. I stared at him, my mouth opening and closing without sound, while around us the elegant ballroom continued its choreographed dance of corporate networking. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over round tables draped in crisp white linen, each centerpiece a tasteful arrangement of Pacific Northwest evergreens and winter roses. The Morgan Industries logo was projected subtly onto the far wall, a reminder that this gathering existed to honor the memory of David Morgan, the company's founder and my father, who had died 6 months earlier in a car accident that had shattered our family in ways I was still discovering. I think there's been a mistake, I managed, my voice barely audible over the string quartet playing near the stage. I'm not the board chairman. My sister Jessica is running the company now. She's the one who should be giving any speeches. Stephen's eyebrows drew together in genuine perplexity. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through what appeared to be official documentation. That's odd. The board minutes from last week clearly list Alexander Morgan as chairman, and the memorial program was approved by the executive committee. Are you saying you weren't aware of your appointment? The conversation felt surreal, like watching someone else's life unfold from a distance. 6 months ago, I had been Alex Morgan, the disappointing younger child, who worked as a mid-level project coordinator at a renewable energy nonprofit in Seattle. I was the one who chose environmental activism over the family business, who earned a master's degree in sustainable development instead of an MBA, who lived in a modest apartment instead of the Lake Oswego mansion where Jessica had remained after college. I was the Morgan child, who showed up dutifully to family dinners, but was rarely consulted on important decisions, who listened politely while my father discussed business strategies with Jessica over dessert, treating me like an interested observer rather than a potential participant. The memorial celebration itself was Jessica's creation, a polished corporate event designed to honor our father's legacy while positioning her as his natural successor. She had spent months planning every detail, from the guest list that included Portland's business elite, to the multimedia presentation showcasing David Morgan's transformation of a small manufacturing startup into a nationally recognized leader in sustainable industrial equipment. Jessica understood the language of corporate success, spoke fluently about market positioning and operational efficiency, wore designer suits with the confidence of someone who had never doubted their place in the business world. I had arrived at the event feeling like an imposter in my borrowed navy suit, purchased specifically for the occasion because my typical wardrobe consisted of hiking boots and fleece jackets more suitable for nonprofit conferences than corporate galas. My plan had been simple: sit quietly at the family table, applaud at appropriate moments during Jessica's tribute presentation, and leave early enough to catch the last flight back to Seattle, where my real life waited. The champagne and formal atmosphere felt foreign to someone more comfortable discussing carbon footprints than profit margins, more at home in community meeting rooms than corporate ballrooms. Stephen was still studying his phone, his confusion evident, According to the corporate records I'm accessing, the board resolution was filed 3 days after your father's funeral. It specifically names you as chairman with immediate effect, pending your acceptance of the position. He looked up at me with the patient expression of someone accustomed to resolving administrative complications. The documentation appears to be properly executed and notarized. The string quartet finished their piece, and the resulting momentary silence amplified the sound of my heartbeat. Across the ballroom, I could see Jessica moving gracefully between tables, greeting guests with the practiced charm that had always made social situations look effortless. She wore a black silk dress that somehow managed to be both elegantly mourning and confidently authoritative, her blonde hair swept into the kind of professional updo that belonged in boardrooms and magazine spreads. Every gesture reinforced her image as David Morgan's obvious successor, the daughter who had earned her MBA from Northwestern, who had worked her way through every department of Morgan Industries during summers and school breaks, who could recite quarterly earnings reports from memory. "There has to be some kind of error in your system," I insisted, though something in Stephen's demeanor suggested this wasn't a simple clerical mistake. "I haven't been involved with Morgan Industries beyond attending family functions. Jessica has been acting CEO since Dad died. She's the one who understands the business operations, who knows the employees, who has relationships with the major clients." Stephen nodded thoughtfully, but his expression remained troubled. "I understand your confusion, and you're absolutely right about Jessica's role as acting CEO. But the board chairman position is separate from operational management. According to what I'm seeing here, your father made specific provisions regarding governance structure that weren't activated until after his death." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Have you received any communication from the corporate legal department recently? Any documentation that might have seemed routine but actually contained important information?" The question triggered a memory that sent an uncomfortable chill through my body. 2 weeks earlier, I had received a thick envelope from Blackstone and Associates, the law firm that had handled my father's estate planning. I had assumed it contained routine.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Paperwork related to settling his personal affairs, standard legal documents that required signatures to finalize probate proceedings. The envelope had arrived on a particularly hectic day at the nonprofit where I worked, competing for my attention with an urgent grant application deadline and a crisis involving a stalled solar installation project in rural Oregon. I had opened the envelope, skimmed the first page of what appeared to be corporate bylaws and governance procedures, and set it aside with the intention of reviewing it more carefully over the weekend. The language had been dense legal terminology that seemed to relate to Morgan Industries' internal structure, nothing that appeared relevant to my life as a nonprofit employee living 4 hours north of Portland. The document had remained in my apartment, buried under a stack of environmental impact studies and project reports, forgotten in the daily routine of work that actually engaged my passion and expertise. "I might have received something," I admitted reluctantly, "legal documents from my father's attorney, but I haven't had a chance to review them thoroughly. They seem to be corporate paperwork that didn't apply to me." Stephen's expression shifted subtly, moving from confusion towards something approaching understanding. "Alex, I think we need to find Robert Blackstone immediately. He's here tonight as one of your father's longtime friends, and he'll be able to clarify the situation." He glanced toward the stage where technicians were making final adjustments to the audio-visual equipment for Jessica's precation. "In the meantime, the memorial program is scheduled to begin in 15 minutes. Do you want me to delay the start while we sort this out?" The suggestion of delaying Jessica's carefully orchestrated tribute felt impossible to contemplate. She had invested months of planning in this event, had personally called every significant client and business partner to ensure their attendance, had worked with professional event planners to create an evening that would simultaneously honor our father's memory and establish her leadership of his company. The idea that my presence might disrupt her moment felt deeply uncomfortable, like inserting myself into a narrative where I didn't belong. "No, don't delay anything," I said quickly. "Let Jessica proceed as planned. Whatever confusion exists about my role can be resolved after the memorial procreation. This evening should focus on Dad's legacy, not administrative complications." Stephen studied my face with the careful attention of someone accustomed to reading between the lines of corporate communications. "With respect, Alex, if you are legally the board chairman, then your participation in tonight's memorial isn't optional. The board of directors has fiduciary responsibilities that extend beyond family relationships. Corporate governance requires specific protocols, especially during public events that affect stakeholder perceptions." His words carried an implicit weight that I was only beginning to understand. Morgan Industries wasn't simply a family business that could be managed through informal agreements and personal preferences. It was a publicly traded company with shareholders, regulatory obligations, and legal structures that operated independently of family dynamics. If I somehow held an official position within that structure, then my absence from appropriate ceremonial roles could create complications that extended far beyond hurt feelings or family politics. The ballroom around us continued its elegant choreography, but I felt increasingly detached from the scene, like watching a movie where the plot had suddenly veered in an unexpected direction. Guests moved between tables, greeting friends and colleagues, while servers circulated with appetizers and wine. The atmosphere radiated success and stability, the kind of corporate confidence that came from 3 decades of consistent growth and innovation under David Morgan's leadership. Everyone present understood their role in this narrative, except apparently. "I need to find Robert Blackstone," I said finally, accepting that avoidance was no longer an option. "Can you help me locate him without creating a scene?" Stephen nodded, pulling out his phone to send what I assumed was a discreet text message. "He's here as a guest, not in any official capacity tonight, but he should be able to provide immediate clarity about the legal situation." He glanced toward the stage again, where Jessica had appeared and was reviewing her notes with the event coordinator. "I'll buy you some time by suggesting we open with the video tribute before any speeches. That gives you about 10 minutes to understand what's happening before you need to make any public decisions." As Stephen moved away to make the necessary arrangements, I found myself standing alone in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by 300 people who all seemed to understand their purpose and place in the evening's events. The irony wasn't lost on me that I had spent 6 months feeling like an outsider to my father's business world, only to discover that I might actually hold a central position within it. The possibility seemed simultaneously absurd and terrifying, like being handed the keys to a sophisticated machine, without any understanding of how it operated. I made my way toward the edge of the ballroom, seeking a quiet corner where I could process this development without the constant backdrop of corporate networking. The wall of windows offered a view of Portland's downtown skyline, the city lights creating a glittering tapestry against the December darkness. This was the world my father had inhabited for 3 decades, a realm of boardrooms and quarterly reports, strategic planning sessions and investor relations. It was a world that had always seemed foreign to my interests and temperament, as different from my nonprofit work as corporate law was from environmental activism. Yet something nagged at the edges of my memory, fragments of conversations with my father that I had dismissed as polite interest in my career rather than meaningful dialogue about shared values. During our last dinner together, just weeks before his death, he had asked detailed questions about the renewable energy projects I was coordinating, showing unusual curiosity about the intersection between environmental sustainability and business innovation. He had seemed particularly interested in my work developing financing mechanisms for community solar installations, asking questions that went beyond parental support into genuine professional inquiry. Alex. The voice belonged to Patricia Wheeler, one of my father's oldest friends and a longtime board member of Morgan Industries. She approached with the measured pace of someone in her 70s who had learned to navigate formal events with diplomatic grace. Patricia had known my father since college, had been present at every major milestone in our family's life, and possessed an institutional memory of Morgan Industries that spanned its entire existence. "Patricia, thank you for being here tonight," I replied, grateful for a familiar face in the increasingly surreal situation. "I was actually hoping to find Robert Blackstone." Stephen Brooks mentioned there might be some confusion about my role in tonight's program. Patricia's expression shifted in a way that suggested she knew exactly what confusion Stephen had encountered. Her eyes, sharp despite her age, studied my face with the intensity of someone evaluating a complex situation. "Robert is here, and I suspect you two have important matters to discuss. But first, I need to ask you a direct question." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Have you reviewed the documentation that Robert sent you regarding your father's governance provisions?" The question confirmed my growing suspicion that the legal documents gathering dust in my Seattle apartment were far more significant than I had realized. "I received papers from his office, but I haven't had time to study them thoroughly. They appeared to be routine corporate bylaws or procedural updates." Patricia nodded slowly, her expression mixing understanding with what might have been disappointment. "Your father anticipated that reaction. He knew you would view corporate governance as secondary to your environmental work." She gestured toward a quiet alcove away from the main crowd. "Alex, those documents don't contain routine updates. They contain the framework for everything your father built over 30 years, including provisions he made specifically for you." As we moved toward the alcove, I caught sight of Jessica across the ballroom, now conferring with the event coordinator near the stage. Her posture radiated confidence and authority, every detail of her appearance and demeanor reinforcing her identity as David Morgan's successor. The contrast between her obvious preparation for this role and my complete ignorance of even basic corporate structures felt like a chasm that couldn't be bridged by legal documents or governance procedures. "Patricia, I don't understand any of this," I admitted as we settled into the relative privacy of the alcove. "Jessica has been running the company since Dad died. She understands the business operations, has relationships with employees and clients, knows the industry inside and out. I work for a nonprofit focused on renewable energy projects. I don't have the background or experience to hold any meaningful position at Morgan Industries." Patricia studied me with the patient attention of someone who had spent decades observing family dynamics and business evolution. "Alex, your father spent the last 5 years of his life carefully restructuring Morgan Industries' leadership framework. Those changes weren't based on traditional business experience or industry knowledge. They were based on his vision for where the company needed to go in the next decades." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle between us. "Morgan Industries isn't just a manufacturing company anymore. It's becoming a leader in sustainable industrial technology, developing solutions for environmental challenges that will define the next generation of business operations." Your father believed that transition required leadership with deep understanding of environmental systems and sustainability principles, not just traditional corporate expertise. The implication of her words sent another wave of unreality through the evening's events. My father had never directly discussed his business strategy with me, had never suggested that my environmental work might be relevant to Morgan Industries' future direction. Our conversations about my career had always felt like parental interest rather than professional consultation, polite inquiries rather than strategic discussions about shared objectives. But Jessica has been preparing for this role her entire life, I protested. She has the MBA, the operational experience, the relationships with employees and clients. How could Dad have intended for me to step into a position I'm completely unprepared for? Patricia's smile carried decades of friendship with my father and deep understanding of his character. David never intended for you to step into Jessica's role, he intended for you to step into your own role, one that he designed specifically around your strengths and the company's evolving needs. She leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on the urgency of someone delivering crucial information. The board chairman position isn't about day-to-day operations, Alex. It's about strategic direction, governance oversight, and long-term vision. It's about ensuring that Morgan Industries continues to honor the values that defined your father's approach to business. Before I could respond, Robert Blackstone appeared at the edge of our alcove, his tall frame and distinguished silver hair making him unmistakable even in the crowded ballroom. At 65, he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had spent 4 decades navigating complex legal and business challenges. His presence immediately shifted the dynamic of our conversation from speculation to official clarification. Alex, he said, extending his hand with formal courtesy, I've been hoping we'd have a chance to speak this evening. Patricia tells me you have questions about the governance documentation. The understatement of calling my complete bewilderment questions almost made me laugh, but Robert's serious demeanor suggested this wasn't a moment for levity. Robert, I'm completely lost. Stephen Brooks approached me about being board chairman, but I have no idea what that means or how it could possibly be accurate. I haven't even read the documents you sent. Robert exchanged a meaningful glance with Patricia before responding. Alex, your father spent considerable time over his final years restructuring Morgan Industries' governance framework. The changes he implemented were complex and far-reaching, designed to ensure the company's long-term stability and strategic direction regardless of unexpected circumstances. He paused, choosing his words with the precision of someone accustomed to explaining complex legal concepts. The board chairman position he created for you isn't ceremonial or honorary. It carries significant authority over strategic decisions, governance oversight, and company direction. However, it's specifically designed to work in partnership with operational leadership, not replace it. The distinction between strategic governance and operational management was beginning to make sense, but the idea that my father had envisioned me in such a role still felt impossible to accept. Robert, I don't have any experience with corporate governance or strategic planning. My background is in environmental project management and renewable energy development. How could Dad have thought I was qualified for a position with that level of responsibility? Robert's expression suggested he had anticipated this exact conversation. Your father believed that Morgan Industries' future success depended on leadership that truly understood environmental sustainability and innovative approaches to industrial challenges. He saw your work in renewable energy development not as separate from business strategy, but as preparation for it. Across the ballroom, I could see the event coordinator signaling for attention as the memorial presentation prepared to begin. Jessica stood near the stage, reviewing her notes one final time, radiating the confidence that came from months of careful preparation. The contrast between her readiness for this moment and my complete unpreparedness for what appeared to be my own role in it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff without any understanding of how I had arrived there. We need to resolve this immediately, I said, urgency creeping into my voice as the reality of the situation became undeniable. The memorial presentation is about to start, and I can't participate in something I don't understand. If I really do hold some kind of official position, then I need to know what that means and what's expected of me. Robert nodded, his expression conveying both understanding and determination. Alex, the next few minutes are going to change your understanding of your father's intentions and your role in his legacy. Are you prepared to hear information that might fundamentally alter your relationship with your family and your career? The question hung in the air between us like a challenge, demanding a decision that would ripple through every aspect of my life. The safe choice would be to defer this conversation until after Jessica's presentation, to maintain the status quo and deal with corporate governance questions in private legal meetings away from public scrutiny. The courageous choice would be to step into uncertainty, to trust that my father's provisions had been made with wisdom and foresight, even if I couldn't yet understand their logic. The sound of the event coordinator's voice echoing through the ballroom sound system made the decision for me. Ladies and gentlemen, we're ready to begin this evening's memorial presentation honoring the life and legacy of David Morgan, founder and visionary leader of Morgan Industries. I looked at Robert and Patricia, then across the ballroom toward Jessica, who had moved to her position near the podium with the poise of someone stepping into her destined role. Whatever my father had intended, whatever legal frameworks he had established, whatever expectations he had placed on me, the truth would emerge in the next few minutes whether I felt prepared for it or not. "Tell me everything," I said to Robert, my voice carrying a determination I hadn't known I possessed. "Tell me what Dad really wanted, and tell me what I need to do." Robert guided me toward a service corridor behind the main ballroom, away from the gathering crowd and the increasing activity around the memorial presentation setup. Patricia followed closely, her expression grave as we moved through the hotel's utilitarian back areas where the elegant facade gave way to practical functionality. The contrast felt appropriate somehow, leaving the polished corporate theater for a space where honest conversations could occur without performance or pretense. "Your father began restructuring Morgan Industries' governance framework 5 years ago." Robert began without preamble as we settled into a small conference room the hotel staff had made available. The changes weren't sudden or impulsive. They were the result of extensive strategic planning and deep consideration of the company's future direction. He opened his briefcase and extracted a folder thick with documents, spreading several pages across the conference table's polished surface. "David spent months with our legal team, environmental consultants, and business strategists developing what he called the Sustainability Succession Plan. The framework was designed to ensure Morgan Industries could navigate the transition from traditional manufacturing to environmental technology leadership." I studied the documents, recognizing my father's handwriting in the margins alongside typed legal language that seemed dense with implications I couldn't yet grasp. "Robert, I still don't understand how this relates to me. Jessica has been preparing for leadership her entire career. She understands the company's operations, has relationships with major clients, knows the industry landscape. How could Dad have intended to bypass all that experience?" Patricia leaned forward, her voice carrying the weight of decades of friendship with my father. "Alex, David wasn't bypassing Jessica's experience, he was creating a complementary leadership structure that would utilize both of your strengths in different capacities." She pointed to an organizational chart among the documents. "The board chairman position he designed for you focuses on strategic direction, stakeholder relations, and long-term vision. Jessica's role as CEO handles operational management, day-to-day decision-making, and implementation of strategic initiatives." The distinction was beginning to clarify, but the magnitude of responsibility still felt overwhelming. Even if I could understand the strategic aspects, I don't have experience with corporate governance or board management. I've never run a board meeting or dealt with shareholders or navigated regulatory requirements. Robert's expression conveyed both understanding and determination. "Your father anticipated those concerns. The governance structure he established includes extensive support systems and advisory resources. You wouldn't be stepping into this role without guidance and expertise." He turned to another section of the documentation. "More importantly, he believed your environmental background provided exactly the perspective Morgan Industries needed for its next phase of development." The service corridor door opened, and Stephen Brooks appeared, his expression urgent but controlled. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation developing. Jessica is asking about the delay in starting the memorial presentation, and several board members are inquiring about the evening's program. We need to make a decision about how to proceed. Robert and Patricia exchanged meaningful glances before Robert responded. Stephen, what's the absolute minimum time we need to provide Alex with essential information before any public role would be required? Stephen checked his watch and considered the question carefully. The memorial video presentation runs 12 minutes. If we begin that immediately, it gives us exactly that long to brief Alex on whatever he needs to know for any public appearance. The timeline created immediate pressure that made abstract legal concepts suddenly concrete and urgent. In 12 minutes, I might need to step onto a stage in front of 300 people and represent a company I barely understood in a role I had never imagined holding. The prospect felt like being asked to perform surgery without medical training or fly an aircraft without understanding aerodynamics. Show me what's most critical, I said to Robert, focusing on the immediate practical requirements rather than the broader implications that threatened to overwhelm my capacity to function. What do I absolutely need to know to avoid making a complete disaster of whatever happens next? Robert quickly organized the documents into priority order, highlighting key sections with practiced efficiency. The board chairman position carries 3 primary responsibilities that would be relevant tonight. First, you represent the company's strategic vision to stakeholders and the public. Second, you provide governance oversight to ensure corporate decisions align with established values and long-term objectives. Third, you serve as the bridge between the board of directors and executive management. He pointed to specific clauses in the governance documents. Your father structured these responsibilities to leverage your environmental expertise rather than require traditional business experience. The strategic vision for Morgan Industries' future is explicitly tied to sustainable technology development and environmental leadership. Your background in renewable energy and conservation makes you uniquely qualified to articulate that direction. Patricia added context that helped the abstract concepts feel more manageable. Alex, your father often said that the most important leadership quality wasn't knowing all the answers, but asking the right questions and surrounding yourself with people who could provide expertise in areas beyond your direct experience. The sound of applause from the main ballroom indicated that Jessica's memorial presentation had begun, giving us the promised 12 minutes to transform my understanding from complete ignorance to functional competence. The timeline felt simultaneously generous and impossibly brief, like trying to learn a foreign language well enough for public speaking in the span of a brief conversation. What about Jessica? I asked, voicing the concern that had been building throughout this discussion. How is she supposed to react to discovering that her role as company leader is more limited than she believed? She's spent months positioning herself as Dad's successor, has been making decisions and setting strategic direction based on the assumption that she had full authority. Robert's expression grew more serious. That's perhaps the most delicate aspect of this transition. Jessica's assumption of full executive authority wasn't incorrect, but it was incomplete. Your father's governance structure was designed to become active only after his death, which means Jessica has been operating without the strategic oversight and board guidance that the new framework requires. The implications created a knot of anxiety in my stomach. Jessica had invested enormous effort in establishing her leadership of Morgan Industries, had made commitments to employees and clients based on her understanding of her authority and responsibilities. The discovery that a significant governance layer existed above her operational role would feel like a fundamental betrayal of trust and recognition. Stephen returned with updates from the main ballroom. The video presentation is proceeding smoothly, but I'm getting questions from several board members about the evening speaking program. Dr. Elena Vasquez specifically asked whether there had been any changes to the planned remarks. He paused meaningfully. She seemed to expect those changes might be necessary. The mention of Dr. Vasquez, whom I recognized as one of Morgan Industries' longest-serving board members, suggested that knowledge of my father's governance provisions extended beyond just Robert and Patricia. The realization that other company insiders had been anticipating this moment while I remained completely unaware felt deeply unsettling. How many people knew about Dad's succession plans? I asked, suddenly conscious of how isolated I had been from information that apparently affected multiple stakeholders. Patricia answered with characteristic directness. The full board of directors was briefed on the governance framework 18 months ago, when your father finalized the legal structure. They understood that activation would depend on specific triggering events, primarily David's death or incapacitation. The knowledge that 7 board members had been expecting my emergence as chairman while I had been living my life in Seattle, focused on renewable energy projects and completely disconnected from corporate governance, created a surreal sense of having been an actor in a play without knowing my role or lines. Robert continued with practical information that demanded immediate attention. Alex, if you choose to accept the chairman position tonight, you'll be stepping into a role with significant responsibilities but also substantial support systems. The board includes experts in environmental technology, sustainable manufacturing, corporate finance, and strategic planning. Your job isn't to have all the answers, but to guide the questions and ensure decisions align with the company's values and long-term objectives. The choice he was presenting felt both monumental and artificial. Accepting meant fundamentally altering my relationship with my family, my career trajectory, and my understanding of my father's expectations. Declining meant potentially abandoning a legacy and strategic vision that had been carefully crafted over years of planning. Neither option offered a simple path forward or guaranteed outcomes. What happens if I say no? I asked, needing to understand all available alternatives. If I choose not to accept the chairman position, what becomes of the governance structure Dad established? Robert consulted the legal documents before responding. The governance provisions include contingency plans for that scenario. If you decline the position within 30 days of activation, the chairman role transfers to a designated alternate chosen by majority board vote. However, the strategic framework your father established would remain in effect regardless of who holds the position. The contingency planning revealed another layer of my father's foresight, but also emphasized that the governance changes weren't dependent on my personal participation. The sustainability focus and environmental priorities would continue with or without my involvement, which somehow made the choice feel both less pressured and more genuinely voluntary. Stephen checked his watch again. We have about 4 minutes remaining in the video presentation. I need to know whether Alex will be participating in the memorial remarks, or if we should proceed with Jessica's presentation as originally planned. The decision point had arrived with mechanical precision, demanding a choice based on incomplete information and insufficient preparation. I looked at the governance documents spread across the conference table, at Robert's expectant expression, at Patricia's encouraging nod, and tried to imagine myself standing before 300 people representing a company and a vision I was only beginning to understand. If I accept the position tonight, what exactly would be expected of me? I asked Robert. What would I need to say or do that wouldn't require expertise I don't possess? Robert quickly outlined what he considered the minimal requirements for a successful introduction to the chairman role. The memorial remarks would focus on your father's vision for Morgan Industries' future, emphasizing the company's commitment to environmental leadership and sustainable innovation. You would acknowledge the board's confidence in the strategic direction while recognizing Jessica's operational expertise and leadership. The framework he described seemed manageable, staying within topics where my environmental background provided genuine knowledge and avoiding areas that would expose my inexperience with corporate management. The memorial context also created natural limitations on what could be expected or appropriate for detailed discussion. Patricia added perspective that helped frame the evening's significance. Alex, tonight isn't about proving your qualifications or demonstrating mastery of corporate governance. It's about honoring your father's memory and introducing the strategic vision he developed for the company's future. Everything else can be learned over time with appropriate support and guidance. The sound of sustained applause from the main ballroom indicated that the video presentation was concluding, leaving perhaps 2 minutes for a final decision. The timeline created artificial urgency, but the underlying choice would remain the same whether made in 2 minutes or 2 weeks. Either I trusted my father's judgment about my capabilities and his vision for the company, or I deferred to my own assessment of my limitations and inexperience. I need to know one more thing, I said, focusing on the concern that felt most crucial to the immediate decision. How do we handle Jessica's reaction to this information? She's built her identity around being Dad's successor, has made commitments based on her understanding of her authority. How do we prevent tonight from becoming a public family conflict that overshadows Dad's memorial? Robert's response revealed careful consideration of the family dynamics involved. The governance structure your father established was designed to enhance Jessica's operational authority, not diminish it. The chairman position provides strategic oversight and stakeholder relations support that should make her CEO role more effective, not more constrained. The distinction was subtle but potentially crucial to how Jessica would interpret the governance changes. If presented as expanded resources and support rather than limitations on her authority, the new structure might feel collaborative rather than competitive. Stephen appeared at the conference room doorway. The video presentation has concluded. I need an answer about the speaking program immediately. I looked once more at the documents, at the evidence of my father's extensive planning and obvious confidence in a vision I was only beginning to comprehend. The choice ultimately came down to trust in his judgment, trust in the support systems he had established, and trust in my own ability to grow into responsibilities that exceeded my current experience and comfort zone. Tell Jessica there's been a development regarding the memorial program, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Ask her to meet us in this conference room before any speeches begin. She needs to understand the governance changes before they become public. Robert nodded approvingly, while Patricia smiled with what appeared to be relief and satisfaction. Stephen departed immediately to manage what promised to be a complex and potentially volatile family conversation. You're making the right choice, Patricia said as we gathered the documents. Your father believed in your capabilities even when you didn't recognize them yourself. Robert organized the legal papers with practiced efficiency. Alex, the next few minutes will determine whether tonight becomes the beginning of a successful leadership transition, or the start of a difficult family conflict. Jessica's reaction will largely depend on how we present the information and frame her role within the new governance structure. The conference room suddenly felt smaller as we prepared for Jessica's arrival. The space that had provided privacy for explanation and decision-making about to become the setting for a conversation that could reshape family relationships and corporate leadership simultaneously. I tried to imagine Jessica's response to learning that the authority she had assumed was subject to oversight she hadn't known existed, exercised by a brother she had always regarded as disinterested in business affairs. The door opened and Jessica entered, her expression mixing curiosity with impatience as she looked from me to Robert to Patricia. Her memorial presentation attire remained impeccable despite the evening's activities, her professional composure intact even in what was clearly an unexpected deviation from her carefully planned program. "What's this about a development with the memorial program?" she asked, her tone polite but edged with concern about disruption to her orchestrated tribute. "The guests are waiting for the speaking portion to begin, and several board members are asking about changes to the schedule." Robert stood, assuming his role as legal counsel with formal dignity. "Jessica, there are governance provisions in your father's estate planning that affect tonight's program, and more significantly the company's leadership structure going forward. These provisions were designed to activate after David's death, which means they're taking effect now." Jessica's expression shifted from impatience to wariness as she sensed the gravity of whatever information was about to be shared. "What kind of governance provisions?" "I've been running the company for 6 months, based on the authority I understood I inherited. The moment felt delicate and crucial, balanced between explanation and confrontation, between family harmony and corporate necessity. Everything depended on how the next few minutes unfolded, whether the governance transition could honor both my father's strategic vision and the family relationships that would need to support its implementation. Patricia stepped forward with the diplomatic skill that came from decades of navigating complex business and personal relationships. "Jessica, your operational authority and leadership of Morgan Industries remain unchanged. What we need to discuss are the board oversight and strategic guidance provisions your father established to support the company's transition to environmental technology leadership." The careful phrasing emphasized continuity and support rather than limitation or challenge, but Jessica's sharp intelligence immediately grasped the implications. Her eyes moved from Patricia to Robert to me, seeking understanding of how this information would affect her position and authority. "Board oversight," she repeated slowly, processing the terminology. "Are you saying there are restrictions on my decision-making authority that I wasn't aware of?" Robert consulted his documents before responding with precise legal language. "The governance framework establishes a board chairman position with responsibility for strategic direction, stakeholder relations, and oversight of corporate decisions to ensure alignment with established values and long-term objectives. The CEO position retains full operational authority within the strategic framework established by board governance." Jessica absorbed this information with visible effort to maintain professional composure despite what had to be significant personal impact. "And who holds this board chairman position that apparently has oversight authority over my decisions?" The question hung in the air between us, demanding an answer that would fundamentally alter our sibling relationship and family dynamics. I met Jessica's gaze directly, knowing that everything about our future interactions would be shaped by how I responded to this moment. "According to Dad's governance provisions," I said as gently as possible, "I do." Jessica's face went through a series of expressions that would have been fascinating to observe under different circumstances. First came disbelief, her eyebrows rising as if she had misheard my words. Then comprehension dawned, her eyes widening as the implications registered. Finally, a carefully controlled mask of professional composure settled over her features, though I could see the storm of emotions churning beneath the surface. She remained silent for nearly 30 seconds, her gaze moving between Robert's legal documents and my face, as she processed information that fundamentally altered her understanding of the corporate hierarchy she thought she had been leading. The conference room felt charged with tension, like the moment before a thunderstorm when the air itself seems to vibrate with potential energy. "Board chairman," she repeated finally, her voice level despite the obvious effort required to maintain that control. "With oversight authority over strategic decisions." She turned to Robert, her tone sharpening. "How long have you known about this governance structure?" Robert responded with the careful precision of an attorney who had anticipated this exact question. "The framework was finalized 18 months ago, Jessica. The board of directors was briefed on its provisions at that time, with the understanding that activation would occur upon your father's death or incapacitation." The revelation that the board had known about these arrangements for over a year while she remained uninformed visibly shook Jessica's composure. Her professional facade cracked slightly, revealing the hurt and betrayal underneath the controlled surface. "The board knew. For 18 months they knew that my authority as CEO would be subject to oversight by someone with no business experience, no understanding of our industry, no relationships with our clients or employees." Her characterization of my qualifications stung because it was accurate, but Patricia intervened before the conversation could escalate into pure confrontation. "Jessica, the governance structure wasn't designed to limit your authority or question your capabilities. It was created to provide strategic guidance and stakeholder support during the company's transition to environmental technology leadership." Jessica turned to Patricia with an expression that mixed respect for their long relationship with barely controlled frustration. "Patricia, you've known our family for 20 years. You've watched Alex choose environmental activism over business, watched him build a career completely separate from Morgan Industries. How can you seriously suggest he's qualified to provide strategic guidance to a manufacturing company? The question demanded an honest answer, and Patricia provided one with characteristic directness. Because your father spent 5 years studying the challenges facing industrial companies in the climate change era, and he concluded that traditional business expertise alone wouldn't be sufficient for navigation through those challenges. She gestured toward the governance documents spread across the conference table. David believed that Morgan Industries' survival and growth would depend on authentic environmental leadership, not just green marketing or superficial sustainability initiatives. He needed someone with genuine expertise in renewable energy systems, conservation strategies, and environmental policy to guide the company's strategic direction. Jessica absorbed this explanation with visible effort to understand rather than simply react defensively. But why couldn't he have included me in that strategic planning? Why create a parallel authority structure instead of expanding my preparation to include environmental expertise? The question revealed the deeper hurt underlying her professional concerns about authority and oversight. She wasn't just discovering limitations on her corporate role, she was learning that her father had developed his most important strategic vision without her input or involvement, despite her lifelong preparation for business leadership. Robert provided context that helped explain the complexity of David Morgan's decision-making process. Jessica, your father recognized that your operational expertise and client relationships were irreplaceable assets that required focused attention. He didn't want to dilute your preparation for CEO responsibilities by adding strategic oversight duties that would demand different skills and experience. Stephen Brooks appeared at the conference room door, his expression urgent but controlled. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation developing in the main ballroom. Several board members are asking about the delay in the memorial remarks, and some guests are beginning to express concern about the program changes. The reminder of the 300 people waiting in the ballroom added immediate pressure to a conversation that needed time and careful navigation. Jessica looked toward the door, then back at the documents, clearly torn between her responsibility to the memorial event and her need to understand the governance changes that affected her professional future. How long do we have before the situation becomes a public relations problem? She asked Stephen, demonstrating the practical focus that had made her effective in managing corporate operations. Stephen consulted his phone. Realistically, about 10 minutes before people start leaving or asking direct questions that require official responses. Jessica turned to me with an expression that combined professional assessment with personal challenge. Alex, if you're going to accept this chairman position, you need to understand what you're stepping into. Morgan Industries has 1,200 employees, operates in 8 states, maintains relationships with major industrial clients across North America, and faces competitive pressures that could destroy the company if strategic decisions are made by someone who doesn't understand the business landscape. Her assessment was both accurate and intimidating, emphasizing responsibilities that seemed to demand expertise far beyond my environmental background. The weight of potential impact on 1,200 employees and their families felt particularly overwhelming, transforming abstract governance concepts into concrete human consequences. Jessica's concerns are valid, I acknowledged, speaking directly to her rather than through Robert or Patricia. I don't have business experience or industry knowledge that would qualify me for traditional corporate leadership. But Dad apparently believed that the strategic challenges facing the company required different qualifications than traditional business background. I paused, trying to articulate thoughts that were still forming as I spoke. Maybe the question isn't whether I'm qualified for the role as it existed before, but whether the role Dad envisioned requires different capabilities than conventional corporate governance. Patricia nodded approvingly. David often said that the biggest strategic mistakes companies make come from applying yesterday's solutions to tomorrow's problems. He believed that environmental challenges would fundamentally change industrial business models, requiring leadership that understood those changes rather than just adapted to them. Jessica considered this perspective with the analytical approach that characterized her professional decision-making. Even if we accept that environmental expertise is crucial for strategic direction, How do we ensure that strategic decisions are grounded in operational reality? Environmental idealism without business practicality could bankrupt the company. The concern she raised was legitimate and important, highlighting the potential for conflict between environmental objectives and business sustainability. Robert addressed it by referencing specific provisions in the governance framework. The chairman and CEO roles are designed to function collaboratively, not independently, he explained, pointing to relevant sections of the documentation. Strategic initiatives require approval from both positions, ensuring that environmental objectives are balanced with operational feasibility and financial sustainability. The collaborative structure helped address Jessica's concerns about potentially impractical environmental policies, but I could see that she remained skeptical about the workability of shared strategic authority. Her experience had taught her that business decisions often required quick responses to market conditions and competitive pressures, scenarios where collaborative decision-making might prove cumbersome or ineffective. What happens when the chairman and CEO disagree about strategic direction? She asked, identifying a potential flaw in the governance structure. If Alex believes environmental priorities require decisions that I consider operationally risky or financially unsound, how do we resolve that conflict? Robert consulted the legal documents before responding. The governance framework includes mediation procedures and board review processes for resolving strategic disagreements. Ultimately, deadlocks can be referred to the full board of directors for resolution through majority vote. The conflict resolution mechanisms seemed thorough in theory, but I wondered how they would function under the pressure of time-sensitive business decisions or competitive market conditions. The potential for paralyzing disagreements between Jessica and me felt particularly concerning given our history of different priorities and perspectives. Stephen returned with updated information about the ballroom situation. The delay is becoming noticeable. Dr. Vasquez asked me to inform you that the board is prepared to support whatever announcement needs to be made, but they need to know the approach within the next few minutes. Jessica stood smoothing her dress with the automatic gesture of someone preparing for public presentation. We need to make a decision about tonight's program. Either Alex accepts the chairman position and participates in the memorial remarks, or we proceed with the original plan and address the governance changes privately after the event. The choice she presented was practical and immediate, but it also carried broader implications for how the leadership transition would be managed and perceived by employees, board members, and other stakeholders. A public announcement during the memorial would signal transparency and confidence in the new structure, while private discussions would allow for more careful preparation and potential revision of the arrangements. What's your preference? I asked Jessica, recognizing that her comfort level with public disclosure should influence the approach we took. She hesitated, clearly weighing multiple factors before responding. Honestly, I'd prefer time to understand the governance structure and work out operational details before making public announcements. But if the board expects disclosure tonight, and if your acceptance of the chairman role is time-sensitive, then we need to proceed with transparency. Her willingness to prioritize company interests over personal comfort impressed me, demonstrating the leadership qualities that had made her effective as CEO despite the challenging circumstances of assuming that role after our father's sudden death. Robert provided guidance based on his experience with similar corporate transitions. The memorial event creates an appropriate context for introducing governance changes as part of honoring David's strategic vision. The board's presence provides institutional support for the announcements, and the timing connects the leadership transition to your father's legacy rather than treating it as a separate business development. Patricia added perspective that helped frame the evening's significance. David would want his memorial to include recognition of the strategic framework he developed for the company's future. Tonight isn't just about honoring his past achievements, it's about committing to the vision he established for Morgan Industries' next chapter. The conference room fell quiet as we all processed the decision that needed to be made. I looked at Jessica, seeing not just my sister or the CEO of Morgan Industries, but a person who had invested enormous effort in building a leadership role that was being fundamentally redefined by information she had never been given the opportunity to understand or influence.
Jessica, I said, choosing my words carefully, I want you to know that accepting the chairman position isn't about challenging your authority or questioning your capabilities. If I do this, it's because I believe Dad's vision for environmental leadership can support and enhance your operational expertise rather than constrain or compete with it. She studied my face with the intensity of someone evaluating both professional assurances and personal sincerity. Alex, I need to know that you understand the responsibility you'd be accepting. 1,200 jobs, millions in revenue, relationships with clients who trust Morgan Industries to deliver reliable solutions to complex industrial problems. Strategic vision has to be grounded in operational reality. Her emphasis on operational constraints reflected legitimate concerns about the practical implementation of environmental priorities within existing business relationships and competitive pressures. I recognize that my enthusiasm for
Renewable energy solutions would need to be tempered by understanding of manufacturing timelines, client requirements, and financial limitations. I understand the responsibility, I replied, though I knew my comprehension remained theoretical rather than experiential. And I understand that I'll need to learn from you and the rest of the team about translating strategic objectives into operational decisions that actually work in the real business environment. Jessica nodded slowly, her expression suggesting cautious acceptance rather than enthusiastic support. If we're going to do this, we need to establish clear communication protocols and decision-making procedures before problems arise. I can't manage operations effectively if strategic direction changes without coordination with operational planning. Robert noted her concerns and suggested immediate next steps. We can schedule comprehensive transition planning sessions beginning tomorrow, but tonight requires a basic announcement of the governance structure and Alex's acceptance of the chairman role. Stephen appeared once more, his urgency now undisguised. I really need a decision. The board members are starting to approach the podium area, and Dr. Vasquez is signaling for information about the program. The timeline had compressed to the point where further discussion would have to occur after public commitments were made. Jessica looked at me with an expression that mixed professional assessment with sisterly concern. Are you ready to do this, Alex? Once you accept the position publicly, there's no graceful way to reverse the decision. The question forced me to confront the magnitude of the choice I was about to make. Accepting meant fundamentally altering my career trajectory, my relationship with my family, and my daily responsibilities in ways I couldn't fully anticipate. It meant leaving the environmental nonprofit work that had defined my professional identity and stepping into a corporate role that would test capabilities I wasn't certain I possessed. But refusing meant potentially abandoning a strategic vision my father had carefully developed over years of planning, disappointing expectations he had placed in my capabilities, and failing to honor the trust he had demonstrated by creating this opportunity for environmental leadership within industrial business. I'm ready, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. I'm ready to accept the chairman position and work with Jessica to implement Dad's vision for Morgan Industries' future. Jessica extended her hand with formal courtesy. Then we're partners in this transition, Alex. I'll support the strategic direction as long as you respect the operational requirements. We shook hands in the hotel conference room, sealing an agreement that would reshape both our professional lives and our family relationship. Robert and Patricia exchanged satisfied glances while Stephen immediately began coordinating the logistics for our public announcement. How do we present this information to the audience? Jessica asked, her focus shifting to practical communication challenges. We need messaging that explains the governance changes without creating confusion about company leadership or stability. Robert suggested an approach that emphasized continuity and strategic enhancement rather than fundamental change. We frame the chairman position as providing strategic guidance and stakeholder relations support that enables Jessica to focus more effectively on operational excellence and implementation of growth initiatives. The messaging strategy felt diplomatically appropriate, but I wondered whether it adequately conveyed the significance of the environmental leadership direction my father had envisioned. The balance between reassuring stakeholders about stability and communicating commitment to potentially transformative strategic changes seemed delicate and crucial. We also need to address questions about Alex's qualifications, Jessica added with practical directness. People will wonder how someone without business experience can provide effective strategic guidance to an industrial company. Patricia offered perspective based on her knowledge of the board's previous discussions. The board has already reviewed Alex's environmental credentials and concluded that his expertise in renewable energy development and sustainability consulting provides exactly the strategic insight Morgan Industries needs for its next phase of growth. The board's prior approval removed one potential obstacle to public acceptance of my appointment, but I knew that employees, clients, and industry observers would form their own judgments based on demonstrated performance rather than credential review. The real test would come in the months ahead as strategic decisions revealed whether environmental expertise could indeed enhance business performance. Stephen coordinated the final logistics as we prepared to return to the main ballroom. I'll introduce the governance announcement as part of the memorial presentation, emphasizing how it honors David's vision for the company's future. Jessica will present Alex as chairman and provide context about the strategic direction, then Alex will make brief remarks about his commitment to continuing David's legacy. The program structure felt appropriate for the memorial context while providing a framework for explaining the leadership transition. As we gathered our materials and prepared to face the 300 people waiting in the ballroom, I tried to mentally prepare for a public role I had never imagined occupying. One final question, I said to Jessica as we reached the conference room door. Are you genuinely prepared to work with this governance structure, or are you accepting it because you don't see alternatives? She considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness before responding. Alex, I won't pretend I'm enthusiastic about discovering that my authority has limitations I didn't know existed. But Dad created this framework for reasons he considered important, and fighting it would damage both the company and our family. She paused, her expression becoming more personal. I'm prepared to work with you as chairman as long as you're prepared to learn from me as CEO. We both have expertise the company needs, and Dad apparently believed we could combine those strengths effectively. Her conditional acceptance felt honest and realistic, acknowledging both her reservations and her commitment to making the partnership functional. As we walked toward the ballroom, I realized that the success of my father's strategic vision would depend not just on my environmental expertise or Jessica's operational skills, but on our ability to collaborate despite different backgrounds and perspectives. The ballroom doors opened, revealing the assembled audience that would witness the beginning of Morgan Industries' next chapter and my own transformation from environmental activist to corporate chairman. The weight of responsibility felt both overwhelming and energizing as I prepared to honor my father's legacy and embrace a future I had never imagined for myself. The ballroom felt different as we re-entered, charged with an energy that hadn't existed before our conference room revelation. 300 faces turned toward us with expressions ranging from polite curiosity to barely concealed anticipation, suggesting that word of unusual developments had begun circulating among the guests despite our attempts at discretion. The elegant space suddenly felt like a theater where I was about to perform a role I had rehearsed for only minutes, in front of an audience that included industry leaders, longtime employees, and family friends who had known me since childhood. Stephen took the podium with practiced ease, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system as he addressed the assembled crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue with tonight's memorial presentation, we have important information to share regarding Morgan Industries' governance structure and strategic direction. These developments honor David Morgan's vision for the company's future while ensuring continuity of the exceptional leadership that has defined our organization. The careful phrasing created anticipation without alarm, suggesting positive developments rather than crisis management. I watched faces in the crowd, noting the particular attention of board members who had known about these arrangements for 18 months but were seeing their activation for the first time. Dr. Elena Vasquez sat at the front table, her expression combining satisfaction with careful observation of how the transition would be managed publicly. Jessica approached the podium with the confident stride that had characterized her corporate presentations throughout her tenure as acting CEO. Her presence commanded immediate attention, demonstrating the leadership qualities that had made her effective in managing the company through the challenging months following our father's death. Despite the personal complexity of the situation, she radiated professional competence and institutional stability. Thank you all for joining us tonight to honor my father's memory and celebrate his contributions to Morgan Industries and the broader industrial community. Jessica began, her voice strong and clear despite the emotional weight of the occasion. Dad's legacy extends beyond the company he built to include the strategic vision he developed for our future growth and environmental leadership. She paused, allowing the concept of environmental leadership to register with an audience that included traditional manufacturing clients and industry stakeholders who might view such priorities with skepticism. Over his final years, Dad invested considerable time and resources in developing a governance framework that would ensure Morgan Industries could navigate the transition from conventional industrial operations to sustainable technology leadership while maintaining the operational excellence that has defined our reputation. The introduction provided context for the governance changes without immediately revealing their scope or my role within them. Jessica's presentation skills allowed her to build understanding gradually, preparing the audience for information that might otherwise seem abrupt or concerning. This governance framework establishes complementary leadership roles that leverage different expertise areas to guide the company's strategic direction, she continued, her gaze moving across the audience before settling briefly on me. Tonight I'm honored to introduce my brother Alex Morgan, whom Dad appointed as chairman of the board, bringing environmental expertise and sustainability leadership to complement operational management and business development. The announcement created a wave of quiet conversation throughout the ballroom as guests processed unexpected information. I saw surprise on faces that had known me primarily as the environmentally focused child who had chosen nonprofit work over business. Confusion from industry colleagues who were trying to understand how someone with my background could hold corporate authority, and calculation from board members who were assessing how this transition would be received by various stakeholder groups. The scattered applause that followed felt polite rather than enthusiastic, reflecting uncertainty about how to respond to news that challenged conventional expectations about corporate succession and qualifications. I realized that this lukewarm reception would characterize many interactions in the months ahead as I worked to prove that environmental expertise could enhance rather than constrain business performance. Jessica gestured for me to join her at the podium, creating a visual representation of the collaborative leadership structure my father had envisioned. Standing beside her, I felt the weight of 300 pairs of eyes evaluating my presence, appearance, and apparent readiness for corporate responsibility. The borrowed navy suit that had seemed adequate for attending a memorial suddenly felt insufficient for representing a manufacturing company to its stakeholders. "Thank you, Jessica," I said, my voice steadier than I had expected despite the nervous energy coursing through my system. "I'm honored by Dad's confidence in my ability to contribute to Morgan Industries' strategic direction, and I'm committed to working with Jessica and our exceptional management team to implement the vision he developed for the company's future." The brief remarks felt safe but inadequate to address the obvious questions about my qualifications and the practical implications of the governance changes. I decided to expand slightly, hoping to provide context that would help the audience understand the logic behind my appointment. My background in renewable energy development and environmental consulting has given me perspective on the technological and regulatory changes that will reshape industrial manufacturing over the next decade. I continued, trying to project confidence despite my internal uncertainty. Dad believed that Morgan Industries' success would depend on authentic environmental leadership, not just adaptation to changing market conditions, and he structured this governance framework to ensure that perspective would guide our strategic decisions. The explanation seemed to resonate with some audience members, particularly younger employees who had expressed interest in sustainability initiatives during their interactions with the company. However, I could see skepticism on faces of longtime clients and industry colleagues who viewed environmental priorities as potential obstacles to operational efficiency and competitive advantage. Dr. Vasquez rose from her front table position, her movement commanding attention throughout the ballroom. As the most senior board member and someone whose environmental credentials were well established in academic and policy circles, her response to the announcement would significantly influence how others interpreted the governance changes. On behalf of the board of directors, I want to express our confidence in the leadership transition that David Morgan planned so carefully, she said, her voice carrying the authority that came from decades of experience in environmental science and corporate governance. Alex's expertise in sustainable technology development and policy analysis provides exactly the strategic insight that Morgan Industries needs as we expand our role in environmental solutions for industrial clients. Her endorsement created visible relief among board members and seemed to reduce the tension level throughout the ballroom. The validation from a respected figure helped legitimize my appointment in ways that my own remarks couldn't have achieved, demonstrating the value of the institutional support my father had built into the governance structure. Robert Blackstone approached the podium area, carrying documents that I recognized as additional materials related to the governance framework. His presence signaled that legal formalities would follow the public announcement, transforming the memorial event into an official corporate transition. If I may, Robert said, addressing both Jessica and me, there are governance procedures that should be completed this evening to formalize the leadership transition and ensure regulatory compliance with corporate structure changes. The mention of regulatory compliance reminded me that Morgan Industries operated within legal frameworks that required specific documentation and disclosure procedures for governance changes. My acceptance of the chairman position had implications that extended beyond family dynamics to include shareholder notifications, regulatory filings, and stakeholder communications that would need professional management. Jessica nodded to Robert before addressing the audience once more. We'll be completing the necessary legal procedures after the memorial presentation, but I want to assure everyone that these governance changes strengthen rather than disrupt the operational continuity that has characterized Morgan Industries throughout its history. Her emphasis on continuity seemed designed to reassure clients and employees who might be concerned about stability during a leadership transition. The messaging reflected her understanding of stakeholder psychology and the importance of confidence in corporate communications. Stephen returned to coordinate the conclusion of the memorial presentation, working to balance the formal requirements of the governance announcement with the emotional significance of honoring my father's memory. The dual nature of the evening created complexity that required careful management to avoid diminishing either the tribute or the business transition. Before we conclude tonight's program, Stephen announced, David Morgan's longtime friend and colleague Patricia Wheeler would like to share some reflections on his vision for Morgan Industries' future and the legacy he hoped to create. Patricia approached the podium with the measured pace of someone who had spoken at countless corporate and academic events throughout her career. Her presence provided continuity between my father's generation and the leadership transition, bridging personal friendship with institutional knowledge in ways that could help the audience understand the governance changes within the context of his broader strategic thinking. David Morgan was a remarkable combination of practical business leader and visionary strategist, Patricia began, her voice carrying easily through the ballroom despite her 70-plus years. He understood that success in the 21st century would require different capabilities than those that had defined industrial leadership in previous decades. She paused, allowing her words to register before continuing with the insight that came from decades of friendship and professional collaboration. David spent his final years studying the intersection between environmental challenges and business opportunities, convinced that companies which embraced authentic sustainability leadership would not only survive the coming changes, but would thrive in ways that traditional approaches could never achieve. The characterization of my father as a strategic visionary rather than simply a successful businessman provided context for the governance framework that might otherwise seem unusual or risky.
Patricia's perspective helped reframe the leadership transition as continuation of careful planning rather than departure from established practices. The governance structure he developed reflects his understanding that environmental expertise and operational excellence are complementary rather than competing priorities, she continued, her gaze moving between Jessica and me. He believed that Alex's background in renewable energy and sustainability consulting would enhance Jessica's operational leadership by providing strategic direction grounded in deep understanding of the technological and regulatory changes reshaping industrial markets. The explanation resonated more effectively than my own earlier remarks, coming from someone with both personal credibility and professional expertise in environmental issues. Patricia's endorsement carried weight that helped address skepticism about my qualifications while emphasizing the collaborative nature of the leadership structure. As Patricia concluded her remarks, I noticed Tyler, Jessica's 16-year-old son, watching the proceedings with intense attention from a table near the back of the ballroom. His expression reflected curiosity rather than the polite disinterest typical of teenagers at corporate events, suggesting that the environmental focus of the strategic direction might appeal to his generation in ways that traditional business discussions never could. The memorial presentation concluded with a moment of silence for my father, creating space for personal reflection amid the business transition. Standing at the front of the ballroom, I found myself thinking not about corporate governance or strategic planning, but about the man who had somehow seen potential in me that I hadn't recognized in myself, who had created opportunities for environmental leadership within industrial business despite my apparent disinterest in corporate affairs. As the formal program ended and guests began moving toward reception tables for continued conversation, board members approached to discuss immediate next steps for implementing the governance transition. Dr. Vasquez led the group, her expression combining satisfaction with the evening's announcement and urgency about the practical requirements that would need attention in the days ahead. Alex, we need to schedule comprehensive orientation sessions beginning tomorrow, she said, her tone shifting from public endorsement to private planning. The board has been prepared for this transition, but you'll need detailed briefings on current strategic initiatives, regulatory requirements, and stakeholder relationships before you can function effectively as chairman. The prospect of intensive education in corporate governance felt both necessary and overwhelming. I realized that accepting the position publicly had been only the first step in a transformation that would require months of learning and adaptation to become genuinely effective in the role my father had envisioned for me. Jessica joined our conversation, her professional demeanor intact despite the personal complexity of the evening's developments. We should also establish regular coordination meetings to ensure that strategic decisions are integrated with operational planning, she said, addressing both me and the board members. The governance structure will only work if communication flows effectively between strategic oversight and operational implementation. Her practical focus on making the collaboration functional impressed the board members, who had undoubtedly been concerned about potential conflicts between environmental idealism and business pragmatism. Jessica's commitment to working within the new framework demonstrated leadership qualities that would be essential for successful implementation of my father's vision. Margaret Collins, my father's longtime executive assistant, approached with information that would require immediate attention. Alex, there are media inquiries about the governance announcement, and several major clients have called requesting clarification about the leadership transition. We'll need coordinated responses that address their concerns while maintaining confidence in company stability. The external communication requirements emphasized how public my new role would be, with stakeholders throughout the industry evaluating Morgan Industries' strategic direction based partly on their assessment of my capabilities and leadership approach. The pressure of external scrutiny added another layer of complexity to an already challenging transition. Robert coordinated the legal formalities required to complete the governance transition, working efficiently to ensure that regulatory requirements were met before the evening concluded. The documentation process felt surreal, transforming my life with signatures on papers that established authority and responsibility I was only beginning to understand. These documents formalize your appointment as chairman and establish the governance framework your father designed, Robert explained as I reviewed the materials. The structure provides significant authority balanced with accountability measures and collaborative requirements that should address the concerns various stakeholders have expressed. As the ballroom gradually emptied, I found myself standing with Jessica near the windows that overlooked Portland's downtown skyline. The city lights created a glittering backdrop for what had been one of the most transformative evenings of either of our lives, marking not just the public acknowledgement of our father's strategic vision, but the beginning of a partnership neither of us had anticipated. "So this is really happening," Jessica said, her tone combining acceptance with residual uncertainty. "We're going to attempt to lead Morgan Industries together despite having completely different backgrounds and perspectives on business priorities." The summary of our situation felt accurate and slightly overwhelming. "Jessica, I know this isn't what you expected when you assumed Dad would pass leadership to you. I want you to know that I'm committed to making this partnership work, even though I have enormous amounts to learn about corporate governance and business operations." She turned from the window to study my face with the careful attention of someone evaluating both professional assurances and personal sincerity. "Alex, the success of this governance structure will depend on honest communication about our different perspectives and genuine respect for each other's expertise. I can teach you about business operations if you can help me understand how environmental priorities can enhance rather than constrain our competitive position." Her offer to share her knowledge while requesting mine in return felt like the foundation for a collaborative relationship that could honor our father's vision while utilizing both of our strengths. The partnership would require ongoing negotiation and compromise, but it offered possibilities for innovation that neither of us could achieve independently. Tyler approached as we prepared to leave, his expression mixing teenage awkwardness with genuine curiosity about the environmental focus of the company's new strategic direction. "Uncle Alex, I've been reading about renewable energy integration in manufacturing processes for a school project. Would you be willing to talk with me about how those technologies might work at Morgan Industries?" His question revealed interest that connected my environmental expertise with the next generation's perspective on industrial innovation. The possibility of mentoring someone who might eventually carry forward the sustainability leadership my father had envisioned felt both humbling and inspiring. "I'd be happy to discuss renewable energy applications with you, Tyler. Your generation will inherit both the environmental challenges and the technological opportunities that will define industrial business in the decades ahead." As we gathered our materials and prepared to leave the Portland Convention Center, I reflected on how completely the evening had altered my understanding of my relationship with my family, my career trajectory, and my father's expectations. 8 hours earlier, I had been Alex Morgan, environmental activist from Seattle attending a corporate memorial out of family obligation. Now I was Alex Morgan, chairman of the board of Morgan Industries, responsible for strategic direction of a company with 1,200 employees and environmental leadership aspirations I was only beginning to comprehend. The transformation felt both impossible and inevitable, as if my father had orchestrated events that would draw me into his business world despite my apparent resistance to corporate involvement. The governance framework he had created provided structure and support for a role I never could have imagined accepting, while the environmental focus connected corporate responsibility with values I had pursued throughout my career. Walking through Portland's quiet downtown streets toward the parking garage, I realized that my father's most significant gift wasn't the chairman position or the corporate authority it represented. His gift was the opportunity to discover capabilities I hadn't known I possessed, to contribute to environmental solutions on a scale that my nonprofit work couldn't have achieved, and to honor his legacy by building something that connected business success with environmental stewardship. The months ahead would test whether environmental expertise could indeed enhance industrial business performance, whether collaborative leadership could navigate competitive pressures and market challenges, and whether my father's vision for sustainable manufacturing could transform Morgan Industries into the environmental leader he had envisioned. The success or failure of those efforts would determine not just the company's future, but the validity of his belief that the next generation of business leaders would need different capabilities than their predecessors. As Jessica and I reached our cars, she paused before departing. "Alex, I want you to know that despite my concerns about this transition, I'm genuinely curious to see whether Dad's environmental vision can work in practical business applications. If you're committed to learning about operations, I'm committed to understanding how sustainability can create competitive advantages rather than operational constraints. Her willingness to approach the partnership with curiosity rather than just professional obligation suggested possibilities for collaboration that extended beyond mere compliance with our father's governance structure. The next chapter of Morgan Industries would be written by siblings who brought different strengths to leadership challenges that would require both environmental innovation and business acumen. Driving north toward Seattle through the Oregon countryside, I found myself thinking about the renewable energy of
projects I would need to leave behind at the nonprofit, the corporate responsibilities I would need to master in Portland, and the family relationships that would evolve as Jessica and I learned to work together as partners rather than just siblings with different career paths. The headlights illuminated the highway ahead, creating a metaphor for the journey I was beginning into leadership territory I had never explored. My father's governance framework provided direction and support, but the actual navigation would require discovering how environmental values could translate into business strategy, how strategic oversight could enhance operational excellence, and how two people with fundamentally different backgrounds could collaborate effectively under pressure. 3 months later, standing in the restored conference room at Morgan Industries headquarters, I would look back on that evening at the Portland Convention Center as the moment when my real education began. Not just education about corporate governance or strategic planning, but about the possibilities that emerge when environmental vision connects with business capability, when family relationships evolve to support shared objectives, and when leadership roles grow organically from authentic expertise rather than traditional credentials. But that night, driving home from the most transformative evening of my life, I simply felt grateful for my father's confidence in potential I was only beginning to discover, and determined to honor his legacy by proving that environmental leadership could indeed enhance business success rather than constrain it. The road ahead remained largely unknown, but for the first time in my career, I felt genuinely excited about the journey. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Morgan Industries boardroom as I reviewed quarterly sustainability metrics that would have seemed impossible 18 months earlier. The conference table that had once felt impossibly intimidating now served as the foundation for strategic discussions that connected environmental innovation with business growth in ways that consistently surprised our clients and competitors alike. The transformation hadn't been immediate or effortless, but the results spoke to the validity of my father's vision for integrating authentic environmental leadership with industrial operations. Jessica entered the boardroom with her characteristic blend of professional efficiency and sisterly familiarity, carrying reports that would define our presentation to the board of directors in less than an hour. The partnership we had forged through months of careful collaboration and honest disagreement had evolved into something neither of us could have anticipated, a working relationship that leveraged our different perspectives to create strategic approaches that neither environmental idealism nor traditional business thinking could have achieved independently. "The third quarter numbers are remarkable," she said, settling into her chair with the satisfaction that came from exceeding ambitious performance targets. Revenue growth of 23%, client retention at 96%, and employee satisfaction scores at the highest levels in company history. More importantly, our environmental impact metrics show genuine progress rather than just marketing-friendly statistics. The combination of financial success with measurable environmental improvement represented the synthesis my father had envisioned when he created the governance structure that brought me into corporate leadership. The numbers validated his belief that authentic sustainability could enhance rather than constrain business performance, but they also reflected countless hours of negotiation, compromise, and creative problem-solving as Jessica and I learned to translate environmental objectives into operational strategies that actually worked in competitive markets. Tyler knocked on the boardroom door, his presence no longer surprising despite his age. Over the past year, my nephew had become an unofficial consultant on generational perspectives and technological innovation, bringing insights about renewable energy applications that complemented his mother's operational expertise and my strategic planning. His enthusiasm for environmental technology had evolved into genuine business acumen that suggested the next generation of leadership might seamlessly integrate sustainability with profitability. The renewable energy installation at the Wisconsin facility is generating 15% more power than projected, Tyler reported with the confidence of someone whose recommendations had consistently exceeded expectations. The cost savings are significant enough that we're getting inquiries from 3 other manufacturing companies about replicating the system. His success in identifying and implementing technological solutions had transformed him from interested teenager to valued contributor, demonstrating how environmental innovation could create competitive advantages that traditional approaches missed entirely. The Wisconsin project had become a model for other facilities and a marketing tool that attracted environmentally conscious clients while reducing operational costs. Dr. Vasquez arrived for the pre-meeting consultation that had become routine before major board presentations, her presence providing continuity with the institutional knowledge and environmental expertise that anchored our strategic decision-making. Her satisfaction with the company's progress was evident in her expression as she reviewed the quarterly reports and sustainability metrics that would anchor the morning's discussions. Alex, the board has received inquiry from Harvard Business School about developing a case study on Morgan Industries' sustainability integration model, she announced, her tone reflecting both professional recognition and personal pride in the company's achievements. They're particularly interested in how environmental expertise in governance leadership has affected operational decisions and market positioning. The academic interest represented external validation that our approach had significance beyond just internal success, suggesting that the collaborative leadership structure my father had designed might serve as a template for other companies facing similar transitions between traditional operations and environmental responsibility. The possibility of contributing to broader business education felt both humbling and energizing. Margaret Collins joined us with updates on external communications and stakeholder relations that had become increasingly important as Morgan Industries' environmental leadership attracted attention from media, industry analysts, and potential partners. The company's profile had grown significantly as our sustainability initiatives generated measurable results and competitive advantages that other organizations wanted to understand and potentially replicate. The documentary crew from the Environmental Business Network wants to schedule follow-up interviews about the governance transition and its impact on strategic decision-making, Margaret reported, consulting her tablet for scheduling details. They're particularly interested in how the chairman and CEO roles function collaboratively rather than competitively. The media attention had initially felt uncomfortable, but I had learned to view it as an opportunity to demonstrate how environmental values could enhance business performance rather than constrain it. The interviews and articles helped attract environmentally conscious clients while reassuring traditional stakeholders that sustainability initiatives were generating genuine business value rather than just fulfilling social responsibility obligations. Robert Blackstone arrived with legal updates and governance documentation that reflected the ongoing evolution of our leadership structure as we refined procedures and expanded successful approaches to new operational areas. His satisfaction with the implementation of my father's vision was evident in his demeanor as he reviewed the regulatory compliance and strategic planning frameworks that had enabled our rapid growth. The SEC filing for the Sustainable Technology Division has been approved, Robert announced, his tone reflecting both legal precision and strategic satisfaction. The subsidiary structure will allow for accelerated development of environmental solutions while maintaining the operational focus that has driven core business success. The creation of a dedicated sustainability division represented the natural evolution of our environmental initiatives from strategic priority to business unit with its own revenue targets and growth projections. The structure allowed for specialized focus on renewable energy applications and environmental technology development while preserving the manufacturing expertise that remained central to Morgan Industries' market position. Felix Martinez joined the pre-meeting consultation with technological updates and data analysis that had become essential for understanding the operational impact of our environmental initiatives. His IT expertise had proven crucial for measuring and documenting the performance improvements that validated our sustainability investments and supported continued expansion of environmental programs. The energy management system is generating data that supports expansion to all manufacturing facilities, Felix reported, displaying charts and metrics on the conference room's presentation screen. The cost-benefit analysis shows return on investment within 14 months for comprehensive implementation across all operations. The technological infrastructure we had developed over the past year provided the measurement capabilities necessary for making evidence-based decisions about environmental investments and their business impact. The data collection and analysis systems allowed us to demonstrate rather than just claim the financial and operational benefits of sustainability initiatives. Patricia Wheeler entered with historical perspective and institutional memory that continued to provide context for strategic decisions and stakeholder communications. Her friendship with my father and knowledge of his long-term vision helped ensure that our rapid growth and evolution remained grounded in the values and objectives that had inspired the governance transition. David would be amazed by how quickly the sustainability integration has generated measurable results, Patricia observed, reviewing the quarterly reports with the satisfaction of someone who had supported the strategic vision from its earliest stages. The collaborative leadership structure is functioning exactly as he hoped, with environmental expertise enhancing rather than constraining operational excellence. Her validation meant more than external recognition or financial metrics, representing continuity with my father's intentions and confirmation that our interpretation of his governance framework was producing the outcomes he had envisioned. The connection between current success and his strategic planning provided motivation that transcended immediate business objectives. As board members began arriving for the quarterly meeting, I reflected on how completely my understanding of corporate leadership and environmental advocacy had evolved since that evening at the Portland Convention Center. The chairman role that had initially seemed overwhelming had become a natural extension of my environmental expertise, providing opportunities to implement sustainability solutions on scales that nonprofit work could never have achieved. The collaborative relationship with Jessica had required continuous negotiation and compromise, but it had produced strategic approaches that neither traditional business thinking nor pure environmental advocacy could have developed independently. Our different perspectives had become complementary assets that enabled creative solutions to operational challenges while maintaining authentic commitment to environmental improvement. Stephen Brooks coordinated the final logistical details as board members settled into their positions around the conference table. The quarterly presentations had evolved from anxiety-provoking performance requirements to collaborative discussions about strategic opportunities and operational innovations that reflected shared commitment to the company's environmental leadership objectives. The agenda includes presentation of quarterly results, discussion of the Sustainable Technology Division launch, and planning for the Renewable Energy Expansion Initiative, Stephen announced, his role having evolved from operations manager to strategic coordinator as the company's environmental initiatives created new operational requirements and opportunities. The board meeting that followed demonstrated how completely the governance structure my father had envisioned had integrated environmental priorities with business strategy. The discussions focused on operational efficiency gains achieved through sustainability initiatives, market opportunities created by environmental expertise, and competitive advantages generated by authentic rather than superficial commitment to environmental responsibility. Dr. Vasquez led the evaluation of our renewable energy expansion proposal, her environmental expertise providing credibility for initiatives that might have seemed risky or impractical from purely financial perspectives. The board's environmental knowledge had become a strategic asset that enabled Morgan Industries to pursue opportunities that competitors couldn't evaluate or implement effectively. James Mitchell, representing the financial oversight perspective, presented analysis showing how environmental initiatives had enhanced rather than constrained profitability through operational efficiency improvements, client attraction and retention, and cost reductions achieved through renewable energy and waste reduction programs. The financial validation of sustainability investments had transformed environmental priorities from cost centers to profit drivers. Susan Torres, whose operational experience complemented Jessica's manufacturing expertise, detailed how environmental considerations had improved product quality, employee satisfaction, and client relationships through innovations that traditional approaches had overlooked. The integration of sustainability with operations had generated competitive advantages that extended far beyond just environmental compliance or marketing appeal. The unanimous approval of the Renewable Energy Expansion Initiative represented the board's confidence in the strategic direction we had established over the past 18 months. The vote reflected both financial analysis and environmental commitment, demonstrating how completely sustainability had integrated with business planning throughout the organization. As the formal board meeting concluded, Tyler approached with enthusiasm for a new technological innovation he had identified through his research into cutting-edge environmental applications. His consistent ability to identify practical solutions that generated both environmental and business benefits had earned him informal recognition as a strategic contributor despite his age. "I've been researching carbon capture technologies that could create revenue streams while reducing our environmental impact," Tyler explained, his presentation materials reflecting the analytical skills he had developed through continued involvement in sustainability planning. The preliminary analysis suggests potential for significant competitive advantages in markets where environmental performance affects client selection. His proposal represented the kind of innovative thinking that environmental focus had brought to Morgan Industries' strategic planning. The combination of environmental benefit with business opportunity reflected the synthesis my father had envisioned when he structured governance to integrate sustainability expertise with operational excellence. Jessica reviewed Tyler's analysis with the careful attention she brought to all strategic proposals, her evaluation process balancing environmental objectives with operational feasibility and financial sustainability. The collaborative assessment demonstrated how environmental initiatives had become integrated with standard business evaluation rather than treated as separate or competing priorities. This technology could differentiate us significantly in markets where environmental performance is becoming a client selection criterion, Jessica concluded, her assessment reflecting both business acumen and environmental understanding. The implementation timeline aligns with our expansion schedule, and the financial projections are conservative enough to provide confidence in the investment. Her willingness to support innovative environmental technologies represented the evolution of her perspective from skepticism about sustainability initiatives to recognition of their strategic value. The transformation had required months of evidence and experience, but it had produced genuine partnership in environmental leadership rather than just procedural compliance with governance requirements. As the afternoon planning session concluded, I found myself standing once again at the boardroom windows, looking out over Portland's skyline with thoughts that had evolved significantly since that first overwhelming evening when I learned about my chairman role. The city view remained the same, but my understanding of how environmental values could integrate with business strategy had been transformed by 18 months of practical experience and collaborative leadership. The success we had achieved felt both satisfying and sustainable, grounded in measurable performance improvements rather than just good intentions or marketing strategies. The financial metrics, environmental impact data, and employee satisfaction scores provided objective validation for the governance structure my father had designed and the strategic direction we had implemented under his framework. More importantly, the collaborative relationship with Jessica had demonstrated that different perspectives and expertise areas could enhance rather than compete with each other when properly integrated through governance structures that encouraged cooperation rather than conflict. The partnership had required ongoing communication and compromise, but it had produced innovative solutions that neither of us could have developed independently. Tyler joined me at the windows, his presence representing the next generation's perspective on the integration of environmental responsibility with business success. His contributions over the past year had demonstrated how sustainability could attract and engage young talent while creating competitive advantages through technological innovation and strategic thinking. Uncle Alex, I've been thinking about graduate school programs that would prepare me for environmental leadership in industrial companies, Tyler said, his career planning reflecting the influence of his experience with Morgan Industries' sustainability initiatives. I want to understand both the business and environmental aspects well enough to contribute effectively to companies that are trying to make the transition we've achieved here. His academic planning represented validation of the career path that had emerged from my unexpected transition from nonprofit environmental work to corporate governance. The combination of environmental expertise with business strategy had created opportunities and impact that traditional career boundaries would have prevented, demonstrating the value of integrative approaches to professional development. Jessica approached with final updates on the day's decisions and planning for the implementation of approved initiatives. Her comfort level with environmental priorities had evolved to the point where sustainability considerations were integrated naturally with operational planning rather than treated as separate or additional requirements. The renewable energy expansion will begin with the Michigan facility next month, Jessica reported, her tone reflecting confidence in both the environmental and business benefits of the investment. The projected energy cost savings should provide return on investment within 16 months, with additional benefits from improved client relations and employee engagement. The timeline and financial projections reflected the analytical rigor we had developed for evaluating environmental initiatives, ensuring that sustainability investments met business performance standards while achieving genuine environmental improvement. The approach had eliminated the perception that environmental priorities required sacrifice of financial performance. As we prepared to leave the office, I reflected on how my father's governance framework had enabled discoveries about the intersection of environmental values and business strategy that I never could have achieved through traditional nonprofit work or conventional corporate roles. The chairman position had required learning that extended far beyond my initial environmental expertise, but it had also provided opportunities to implement sustainability solutions on scales that purely advocacy work couldn't have reached. The partnership with Jessica had evolved into genuine collaboration that leveraged our different strengths while minimizing our individual limitations. The governance structure my father had designed had proven flexible enough to accommodate our learning process while providing sufficient framework to ensure productive rather than destructive conflict resolution. Walking through Morgan Industries headquarters toward the parking area, I noticed the subtle but significant changes that reflected the company's environmental transformation: energy-efficient lighting systems, waste reduction programs, air quality improvements, and renewable energy installations had created a workplace that embodied rather than just promoted environmental values. The employee bulletin boards displayed updates on sustainability initiatives, energy conservation achievements, and environmental impact metrics, alongside traditional business performance indicators. The integration of environmental information with operational communications reflected how completely sustainability had become part of the company culture rather than just management priorities. Driving home through Portland's evening traffic, I thought about the renewable energy projects I had left behind at the nonprofit, wondering whether those initiatives had achieved the impact and scale that my corporate role had enabled. The question wasn't intended to diminish the value of nonprofit environmental work, but to recognize how different organizational contexts could provide different opportunities for environmental leadership and innovation. The corporate position had required compromises and business considerations that nonprofit work avoided, but it had also provided resources and implementation capabilities that advocacy organizations couldn't match. The combination of environmental expertise with business strategy had created possibilities for systemic change that purely idealistic approaches couldn't achieve.
3 months later, standing before an audience of business school students and faculty at a conference on sustainable business leadership, I would articulate the lessons learned from our governance transition and environmental integration. The presentation would emphasize how authentic environmental expertise could enhance rather than constrain business performance when properly integrated with operational excellence and strategic planning. But that evening, driving home from another successful day of collaborative leadership and environmental innovation, I felt primarily grateful for my father's vision and confidence in possibilities I hadn't recognized in myself. His governance framework had created opportunities for professional growth and environmental impact that exceeded anything I could have imagined when I was focused exclusively on nonprofit advocacy work. The road ahead remained full of challenges and opportunities as Morgan Industries continued expanding its environmental leadership and market position. The Sustainable Technology Division would require careful development, the renewable energy expansion would test our implementation capabilities, and competitive pressures would continue demanding innovation and efficiency improvements. However, the foundation we had established through 18 months of collaborative leadership and environmental integration provided confidence that future challenges could be addressed through the same combination of analytical rigor, creative problem solving, and authentic commitment to environmental values that had generated our current success. The partnership with Jessica would continue evolving as we encountered new situations that tested our collaborative decision-making processes and strategic alignment. The relationship had proven resilient enough to handle disagreements and flexible enough to accommodate learning, suggesting that future growth would strengthen rather than strain our working partnership. Most importantly, the success of my father's governance framework had demonstrated that environmental leadership could indeed enhance business performance when properly implemented through collaborative structures that integrated different expertise areas rather than treating them as competing priorities. The model we had developed might serve as a template for other companies facing similar transitions between traditional operations and environmental responsibility. That validation felt like the ultimate tribute to my father's memory and strategic vision, proof that his confidence in the intersection of environmental values and business success had been justified by practical experience rather than just theoretical possibility. The legacy he had created through careful governance planning would continue generating environmental and business benefits long after our individual contributions had been superseded by future innovations and leadership transitions. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.